My name is John Fultz. I'm Director of User Interface Technologies at Wolfram Research, and I'm going to be talking today about the state of the front end in 2019. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started here. I think there's still a few people filtering in. My name is John Fultz. I'm with the User Interface Group, Wolfram Research. I am tied into all the stuff with the notebook front end, which is what I'm going to be talking about today. Also tied into a bunch of our mobile development, which I'm not going to be talking about today, but we do have a couple of talks coming up. Parth Pratap and Nick Zitzman are going to be talking this afternoon, right? And about our mobile ecosystem, and then there's going to be another talk tomorrow by Rob Riquet-Schofield, Jason Harris, tomorrow afternoon, right? About the player and some of the technology that we have for that. Not going to focus on those just at the moment, but I did want to just announce them so you know that they're there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about call out a few things that are coming in version 12.1. That's what you're interested in. I'll mention just a little bit of the past too, but we have a lot of projects in motion, and I'm unlike Stephen and the way he gives his talks, which are like a survey of everything it seems that's happening throughout the entire company. There is a lot of stuff that's happening I'm not going to cover. If I didn't hit your favorite topic, it's talk to me, or talk to, we have a bunch of front-end people here. Talk to any one of us. So the single biggest thing that's been occupying our thoughts, and based on user feedback has been occupying a lot of your thoughts too, is high DPI support, and especially under Windows. And so this is something that we've been putting a lot of effort into for version 12.1, and it's not a one-off sort of thing. It's not even just for Windows. It's really something that it's a system that we're building for the future, and it dealt with a lot of legacy stuff, some of which is good to talk about here because in the previous talk, one of the things that came up was how far back do we support stuff, some of the stuff that's like in mass source or old notebooks or whatever, and kind of how long we support that. And some of the high DPI stuff has not major consequences, but noticeable consequences for some of how we have handled the long-term support and compatibility of notebooks. So with that, let's get started. This has been an assumption that has been embedded in the notebook front end since 1996, and maybe even earlier, but 1996 was kind of a reset of the front end, and the notion that there is a correlation between pixels and linear distance, and a pixel is 1/72nd of an inch. If you know anything about the print world, you will recognize that number. That's the same size as a printer's point, so not pulled out of nowhere. And so this is an assumption that we embedded into the front end a very long time ago, in a day and age when we've then built a lot of assumptions on top of it. And so just to emphasize the point, here's a 1 inch by 1 inch pixel grid, 72 pixels on a side visualized. And I'm just going to zoom in on that for purposes of exploring a bit of what we're talking about. In this case, it's a 1/6 by 1/6 inch pixel grid, 12 pixels on a side. So one of the big things that happened a few years ago was in the world of Apple machines, where they released what they called their Retina technology. And Retina was literally a pixel doubling, or doubling in each dimension. There are 4 times as many pixels, but twice as many in each dimension. And so we released a Retina version of our product, and I forget exactly which release it was, but a few years ago, and we had to revisit some of our old assumptions, but there were certain, the fact that everything was an even doubling sort of made things easy for us. We dealt with some of the problems, but we didn't really deal with all the problems at the time. And so in this case, this is our pixel grid, 24 pixels on a side, same in principle, same linear distance, same linear dimensions. So now on the Windows side, it's interesting because Windows, if you, from a programmer's perspective, you've been able to query what the monitor resolution is under Windows. And Windows has been telling us 96 dpi since Windows 95. And well, there weren't really any 96 dpi monitors back then, but Windows wasn't looking at the monitor. It just said, you're running a 96 dpi monitor. So Windows was kind of lying to us. But it was a number that Microsoft chose. They had the reasons for choosing it. They felt that it was good to actually specify kind of a tighter resolution because that had the effect actually of making things a bit larger. And so if you specify a 12-point font, you're looking at it on a screen, and especially the screen technologies of the day, having it be a little bigger helped the readability compared to, for example, the printed page. Macintosh, at the time, was saying 72 dpi. And so we had to make some sort of decision. And the decision that we made was, we're just going to say 72 dpi as well. And so the state of affairs in 1996 was, if you held a ruler up to the screen, a lot of monitors, I mean, they weren't uniform, but a lot of monitors actually were 72 dpi. So in 1996, Macintosh was right. We were right, in some technical terms. Windows was wrong. If you're going to compare to what the ruler on the screen actually says. Well, that was a long time ago. State of affairs now in version 12 has flipped completely. Interestingly, and here I had to change the table a little bit. I'm specifying now typical low-res monitors because the situation gets different with high-res monitors. But when I say a typical low-res monitor, I mean the kind of monitor that you're buying for $75 at Best Buy. And so even those are now actually typically 96 dpi. That's about right. And so Microsoft read the future well on that one. And Apple, well, they have their reality distortion field. So in their universe, it is 72 dpi, I'm sure. But our assumption looks problematic. And it's, people have noticed this on Stack Exchange. Sometimes you'll see questions. Oh, I make a 12-point font in Mathematica, and it doesn't look like a 12-point font in other applications, even though the magnification is 100%, and it looks like I'm comparing apples to apples. So be it. So this is where we're going to be for 12.1, which is for the typical low-res monitors. Windows says 96 dpi, Mac says 72 dpi. And we say, arguably, maybe what we should have done a long time ago, but these, these decisions get made. But now we're saying trust the OS. And we kind of have to do that. And we have to do that because in 1996, people were just completely inventing these numbers. Microsoft has just had 96 hard-coded somewhere and always returning it. That's not true anymore. These days, there's actually some, in the case of Microsoft, beginning with Windows 7 and then really kind of strengthening into Windows 10, where Microsoft and the hardware vendors who work with Microsoft have some real intelligence about about what the default settings should be. And then, of course, Apple has Retina. And only 2 choices in Apple right now, but who knows what Apple might do in the future. Apple might decide that Retina isn't good enough and we need a super Retina. And if you look at what's happened in the world of iOS, that is such a proposition doesn't seem ridiculous. So good to be prepared for that. So trust the OS is what is happening in 12.1. But this has a consequence. This has a few consequences, and so one is here's a 96 DPI grid and a 72 DPI grid, and they don't look like one another. They don't look anything like one another at all, and they happen to both be divisible by 12. There's at least that, but that's not necessarily very helpful, and it gets worse because we're just looking at low-res monitors here. There are a number of people who have, this is what Microsoft calls 100% scaling. And if you go into your operating system settings, there's a display setting that allows you to change the scaling. It's set to a default according to your particular hardware. By the way, may be different from monitor to monitor. It might not be the same for all the monitors that are simultaneously hooked up to your system. But so one of the kind of worst case scenarios is the 125% scaling, which is 120 DPI. And one of the things that we've been thinking a lot is the greatest common factor of a bunch of these numbers because they keep coming up for us. So this means then that if we look at our 12-point grid with all the pixels the same size, that on 96 DPI, that the 12-point grid is physically larger here on the monitor. And so, and notice that I started using the word points here, pixels and points, and that's what we have to think about. Are we talking about pixels or are we talking about points? And so so what's happening here is then, as a result, if we're going to draw a 12-point character, we're going to get something like this. And this isn't just for fonts, it has broader consequences throughout the system. But what this means is that if it's trust the OS, then we're going to have a compatibility issue. And when I say compatibility, I don't mean in that broken files or something like that, but I mean things are going to look different. And that's a consequence of a decision we made, for better or worse, a long time ago, but that's where we're at. So if you're comparing version 12 and version 12.1, on Macintosh, looks the same, because Macintosh is telling us 72, or in the case of Retina, 144 DPI. But in the case of Windows, things are going to look different. Now, we did try to, in order to make this not too bad, for people who have low-res monitors, we do have a legacy setting. So 12.0 and 12.1 look the same. And low-res monitors is kind of the worst-case scenario because you have fewer pixels and if all your windows get bigger. But if your screen scaling is anything other than 100%, which basically means you have some form of high DPI, high-resolution monitor, then we're going with what the monitor tells, or with what the operating system tells us. And so that's the consequence. Some people love it. I wear progressive lenses because I'm getting older, and I love it. Other people are like, we loved our fonts tiny, and tinier would have been better. And so it's difficult to get universal agreement on this, but that's where we're at. This has some other consequences too, and some of them you might not have thought of. If you do any programming with the front end, the good news is that we documented things the correct way. Almost everywhere in the documentation, we said points. We didn't say pixels, we said points. And kind of breathing a sigh of relief about that one because that's what we're committing to now. Before, pixels and points were effectively the same, but that's not true anymore. If you specify not just the font size, but if you specify a window size is no longer in pixels. In fact, even under Retina in the shipping versions, it wasn't technically in pixels either, but we were kind of saying, well, it's just a doubling, so we can kind of wave that away. We can't wave it away anymore because it's not a simple factor. That means that when you look at any of the options I've listed here, the most common ones you're going to run across, window size and window margins affecting notebooks, image size, image margins, the various sizes and margins sort of options, and then anything that refers to absolute coordinates. Thickness and point size and dashing, those are all absolute. Offset is also an absolute base coordinate system, and these have always been documented in points. Now, what should be the case, though, is that as long as you didn't embed in your code any assumptions about points, things may get bigger, but they should get bigger uniformly. So it's, there wasn't really the case as we were going through here that we did a lot that made any kind of assumption about, oh, it's 1 pixel. There were a few cases we had to be careful of where we had, we did some things like, and mostly it was like drawing a 1 pixel thick line, and this came up a little bit with tick marks and things like cell brackets, and a few cases where we just, we wanted to be able to draw a 1 pixel thick line and nail it to the pixel grid. And so there were a few things for us, but I don't think, as long as you had the right assumptions before, I don't think it will generally be a problem. And if you do notebook programming, there are lots of options you would find in the option inspector too that I didn't list, cell level and notebook level options. And then just a little bit more in terms of how we explore this, and a few people among the beta testers have reported this and kind of had some head scratching where, well, I did system information in version 12, and I did system information in in the 12.1 beta, and it looks very different. And so in my case, I ran this on a Surface Book 2, which is a 200% scaling, so it basically dropped down by a factor of, well, not just 1/2, because it also had to navigate the 72 versus 96 DPI. And then we added a current value, which is more discriminating in terms of the kind of information that it can return about monitors. So pixel constraint as an option is, there isn't really anything we can do with that. We're just going to have to deprecate it. Raster size we won't deprecate, but I wouldn't recommend using it. Raster size is one thing that's documented to be in pixels, and it's much better, I think, to go with the alternative options, image size and image resolution, which I think would do what you want. If you're doing beta testing, if you're getting beta from the conference, there's still a little bit of work that we're doing on image and rasterize to push this all the way through. That's the biggest part of my talk. I wanted to get into a few other things that I wanted to call out, things that are in motion, and this one is not dead certain to be in 12.1. I'm hoping it will be, but we'll see. We've spent a lot of work on updating our 3D rendering engines. Yutsu is going to be talking about this tomorrow afternoon, along with some very exciting shader technology and some other stuff that he wants to show. But the big thing here among the Mac crowd, people have been asking for Metal for ages. Well, it's become increasingly clear that Apple has no interest in OpenGL anymore. They haven't updated OpenGL in years. And so we are making the transition. We're also updating our Windows layer. So I want to talk a little bit about Wolfram Alpha notebooks. And I'm not going to go into huge detail about the Wolfram Alpha Notebook Edition product, but there will be a talk and a training session later about that. I have info on that on my next slide, but I just wanted to, it's a really exciting product, I think, and it's something that my group was very interested in because a lot of the, it's really two pieces of technology coming together, like the old Reese's Peanut Butter Cup commercials, the Wolfram Alpha and notebooks, and my group, and especially Lou D'Andrea, I don't know if he's here, did a lot of work on this, and so we have notebooks that that can do some very fancy things. Let me pop up the magnification on this a bit, oops. And so this is basically, it's just like the notebook experience, except it's the plain English input, and it has some notion of kind of linearity. It figures out what I want to plot because it was the previous thing that was there. It's also taking a look at inputs and saying, well, we have the predictive interface for outputs, but it also adds a predictive interface for inputs, which is cool, because outputs can be sometimes reductive about your exploration. And so being able to examine the inputs, and in this case is, do something like that, where it's figuring out how to solve for the zeros there. It's very cool. So this is a standalone product that we kind of scoped to be limited for a particular audience, but don't think that these notebooks are limited to the standalone product because we just didn't quite get it ready in time for 12.0. But in 12.1, we have these Wolfram Alpha mode notebook here as well. And this is a statement that I wanted to make sure everyone understood, is that although it is a different kind of product, there's one world of notebooks. And it's always going to be the case that anything we do, notebooks here, notebooks there, everything works in every product that we ship. And so this is, it's not the case that there is like a Wolfram Alpha notebook format that's somehow different from everything else. That's something that I've pushed very hard for, and I think it's kind of, it's part of what we do as a company is, we have a grand unified vision for these things. More about that, and by the way, this was technology that was built largely using, the Wolfram Alpha notebook product was built largely using the stuff that we shipped. I mean, I can't give you a Lou D'Andrea to work on it, but all the technology that he used is in the product that you have today. I'm running low on time, so I may end up having to cut a little bit at the end, but I wanted to call out completions, and this is something that is kind of cool that we've been working on, and it's not on in the betas yet, but it will be soon. Basically the idea is, if you've played with some of the modern programming editors, this is a very hip thing to do, where you don't have to type in necessarily everything in order, all of the things in sequence that it can kind of figure out. If I type in LIPL, that sounds like maybe a list plot or list play or list plot 3D. I just had a 3 after that, and now it's giving me a new set of choices that works with that. Or I can something like BUCH, and that gets me straight to bubble chart stuff, that kind of thing. This is, I mean, we hear people saying that there's really cool stuff going on in modern editors that we want to see in the notebook front end. We do too. So, here's just a little bit about how that works. I need to speed it along, so I won't go into that. And I also wanted to call out really quickly, and this is something that's easy to overlook, is we have the Hyperlink interface was always really kind of terrible and old and from straight out of 1996. And so we have something better now that's, that it's much easier to use. It supports it supports auto detection and so on, and it will figure out editing, no problem. If you don't like our auto detection, you can just mouse over, and edit it and remove the link, and there you go. And so that's just a few things that I want to mention. I don't have time for questions, I don't think, but I'm happy to talk to anyone afterwards. So thank you very much.